what to do after Black Friday. Common mistake I see, people start to kind of take the foot off the gas. Not around here, partner. Not around here. When you have hundreds of ads, well, that's a lot to look at. It's a lot to figure out. So I'm first going to talk about how to organize performance and what was actually launched and what happened. And then I'm going to talk about a post-mortem framework that I have been using across different industries for years. This is a way to break apart how you feel about it and just write down what happened. I love working with Pilot House because while we are a performance marketing agency, we really pride ourselves on caring so much about brand and creative. At Pilot House, we don't just make ads, we craft them. Every edit, every word, every scroll-stopping detail is built with purpose and care, and I truly believe that care drives creativity and creativity drives results. Our attention to both scale and brand allows us to craft strategies that deliver you short-term results while making you long-term successful, which is so important for any DTC brand. If you are curious about learning more about working with Pilot House, you can fill out a lead form at pilothouse.co and let them know you want to go on a brand new ad venture. You don't actually have to say that. You don't have to make a pun. I'm not going to force you to make a pun. Just fill out the lead form. We'd love to chat with you. Hi, welcome back to Ad-venturous, the podcast produced by DTC and hosted by me, Aves. Today, I wanted to talk about what to do after Black Friday. I know it's not a very sexy, exciting topic because it's going to dive really deep into systems, organizational thought process, and a post-mortem document that I've been using across different industries. But to me, it's very exciting. And to me, it's very important. It's even more important in my eyes than what you do before Black Friday. I've been lucky enough to be around a lot of specifically millennial women who are incredibly organized. And I feel like something that they've really taught me is if you make a mistake and you don't write it down, then you're probably going to make it again. And same with a win. If you do something that works and you don't write it down, you're probably going to forget because we were all busy during Black Friday. We're all kind of running on fumes. And so it's easy to forget little pieces, especially when you put a year between these moments. So I'm going to talk to you guys about what I do to ensure that every Black Friday I'm getting better, I'm getting stronger. And yeah, I hope you guys had really good Black Friday weekends. I wish you all the best of vibes. I don't know. I'm putting good energy out there for your results that have passed now and also future results, because I feel like sometimes also, just to go on a little bit of a rant here, people forget how money December can be. Okay? People actually are buying gifts. I feel like sometimes in marketing, it's November 1st, get the holiday stuff out there. But people, normal people, human beings, consumers are actually just now starting to go to the supermarket and see a Christmas tree up and think about getting those gifts for their friends and family. So it's kind of a common mistake I see where people start to kind of take the foot off the gas after Black Friday. Not around here, partner. Not around here. I think I briefed 20 ads today and I made an additional 10 on my own. So things are still hot and heavy over in my neck of the woods. And that's how it's got to be. Like I said, December's money, but I'm going to talk about further out and how to take what just happened over your respective Black Friday weekends or November, however long you were running a promo for, and then how to apply it to next year and how to really make sure that you fully understand what happened, why, and what you can do about it next time. Not to brag before I get into all this, I mean, maybe to brag a little bit, but I saw the highest revenue days in company history, as well as, put a drum roll here, the most efficient Black Friday performance ever, which is so exciting as a marketer. It just proves, especially in this climate, it's you're kind of on the right path and the strategies that you've deployed are working. And it's such a gratifying feeling. And it would truly mean the world to me if I could show you guys how I got here, give it to you, and then you do it as well, because it is the best feeling. I can't explain it other than just wonderful, cool, fun, plus 10,000 aura, skibby, 6-7 is a good way to explain it, I guess. I'm getting sidetracked. I'm going to talk today about how to, like I mentioned, sort of organize, analyze, and then action learnings from Black Friday this year into your program next year, and also just into your plans for 2026. And so the way I described it then is exactly how I think about it. First, we're going to talk about systems to organize what just happened. I am a freak about content. I really, truly am. I love making it. I love thinking about it. It's like how my brain just like works now. So I was making like hundreds of ads for a singular brand. That is how much content it does take. It's all strategic. It's all built for specific personas, blah, blah, blah. But I was making hundreds of ads, right? So it's like when you have hundreds of ads, that's a lot to look at. It's a lot to figure out. So I'm first going to talk about how to organize performance and what was actually launched and what happened. And then I'm going to talk about how I go about analyzing what happened through this is so nerdy of me, but a post-mortem framework that I have been using across different industries for like years. I came up with it when I was like quite young and I use it. This is so lame. I really don't have to say this in the podcast, but I will. Sometimes I use it in my personal life. If I'm like overthinking a situation or just nervous about something, I use this post-mortem framework as almost like a diary or a journal entry, which is, yeah, really embarrassing, but I love it. So maybe you guys will love it too. And then the last piece of this is how to action it for next year. So I'm going to go into some detail about how I actually go about making sure that I make the necessary changes coming into both 2026 and also Black Friday 2026. So just to get into it, starting with organizing. Like I mentioned, if you are someone who is like an absolute lunatic like I am and you make a lot of content, then first of all, hey, let's chat about it. I love talking about it and I love making it. But second of all, you probably know that it is very difficult to almost like engage with results, because when you have hundreds of ads and different variations in terms of like copy, in creative copy, CTAs, all of these things, it gets overwhelming. And I'm like right there with you. I used to really struggle with like, I'm trying to head into something like Northbeam, Triple Whale, Ads Manager, whatever platform, Pinterest, Snap, like looking at results directly and just being like, this is like a crap ton of content. I don't even know where to start. And so I built out a framework. I use Figma. You can use Milanote. And I use it to sort of process months at a time. I've talked about it in the past in terms of a monthly look back, but I want to talk about it today, specifically how it applies to Black Friday. So what I do is I break down ads by the persona that they were intended for. So if that already, you're like pausing the episode and you're out because you're like, well, I don't make ads for personas. I just make ads. I have to tell you, you are kind of leaving money on the table a little bit. Well, not a little bit, a lot. And with the changes, especially on Meta, you need to know who you're making ads for. I talk about this a lot. I talk about how I stalk people a lot, find out what they're into, find out what they're looking at, listening to, who they're following, etc. But if you're not making content with a specific persona in mind that you have proven out is important for your brand, you are not doing digital marketing. You are vibing, my friend. And if you don't know how to go about creating personas that complement your overall growth strategy and actually make sense for your brand, go over to the Pilot House website and fill out a lead form. We can chat directly. I do love talking about this. I always say that. That's really embarrassing, but it's really genuine. I do like to talk about this stuff. But yeah, if you're sort of in this, and also no shame, I think a lot of folks can get to a place that's very successful without ever really considering who they're talking to. If you have a really cool product and a really cool brand, that can happen, but you're just not going to be able to break through that next scale ceiling unless you fully understand who you are approaching with these ads, especially with the rollout of Andromeda, which is still the lamest name of all time. We really put the wrong people in charge of tech, you know what I mean? It's always the lamest names and the lamest outfits as well. not mincing words, but it's just like, yeah, Andromeda is a lame name. But anyway, on a more serious note, since the rollout of Andromeda, it is more important now than ever. Like, creative is your means for targeting and finding your audience. So if you're not creating that creative, knowing exactly who it's going to, again, you are not leaving a little money on the table. You are leaving like a lot of money on the table. So reach out, we can chat about it, and then you can come back and listen to the rest of this episode, I guess. But anyway, how I actually organize my content and what's been tested is around what persona it was intended for. So a lot of brands, you'll see maybe 3, 4, it kind of depends on the size of the brand and what you sell, but you'll see a couple different personas and archetypes that match your product and your brand, right? So those are all nestled into your brand. And then what I do is you can kind of think of it as like a pyramid. At the very top is the brand. And then you have our main target personas. And then under that, I start filling that in immediately, actually. I started doing it today, and today is Cyber Monday. So immediately start filling it in with like what content was created for them. And then I'll attach some metrics to it. The metrics are going to really depend on you and your brand. I tend to, when I'm doing actual like creative analysis, I look at obviously what was spent on the ad. I look at the return on the ad spend. I look at NCAC. I look at cost per click. I also look at CTR, click-through rate. And those kind of give me enough of an idea. Because I create content at such an elevated, freakish level, I never really look at like frequency because it doesn't really matter to me. And there's never like, I also typically do work with brands that are a little bit larger. So frequency isn't really something that I'm super engaged with. Sometimes I'll look at impressions. That is kind of in specific situations, but for Black Friday specifically, what I mentioned, which is spend, ROAS, NCAC, CPC, CTR, those are kind of the main tenets of what I pull in to do my later analysis. That's what I pull in from a reporting point of view. I also then break it down by, so like I mentioned, there's the triangle, brand at the top, who are the personas, what content was meant for what persona. Within that, I will, specifically with Meta, pull out who the content actually landed with, because it is not always who you thought it was going to be, right? Like you might have made ads for like Gen Z women and they ended up working with Gen X men. Who knows? You know, Meta is a wild place. And maybe that's just what happened. So it's important to like sort of validate at this stage who the ads actually performed with over the weekend versus who they were intended for. Something that I have played around with in the past, and this is really like a detailed look at this process, is having a representation of both who I was intending these ads to go to, and then within that, pieces of data that tell me who they actually went to. And then I'll also duplicate it. This is where it's getting nuts. And this is what it looks like, I think, inside of my brain. But I duplicate it and then I switch it around based on the actual performance. That I find is really interesting for me. I'm quite a visual person, I guess. I mean, content and creative is my whole shtick. So I really like to see visually where my ads were supposed to go versus who they actually went with, because that helps me later kind of fill in a gap where it's like, okay, if say one product didn't really move, that might have been because none of our ads were really touching on that persona who tends to shop that product. So I think it's really important to like show yourself what you thought was going to happen versus what really happened. And then within that, I also break things out by platform. So, you know, I work with brands where we're spending on TikTok, Pinterest, like Snapchat, AppLovin, everything. I used to also document where traffic was going based on persona, but what I have found, and this is something that I think just like comes with experience and tenure with a brand, what I found is like, I don't really need to document that now. We do run a lot of different pages and we send traffic to a lot of different destinations. But at the end of the day, because I work at Pilot House and have access to Warp Drive, I'm able to keep a pretty close finger on the pulse there as with the entire team. So sometimes it's not totally necessary to put that information into this Figma. You can if you want. I have like mapped ads to like destination spots before. I just found that that is almost like a separate conversation and a separate exercise that you want to analyze. So it's better just to keep it focused on pre-click in this Figma or Milanote or wherever you want to make this thing on an iPad. Love my iPad, gotta shout it out. But yeah, you can just kind of focus on the pre-click side of things instead of post and separate the two, especially in like really high volume periods like Black Friday, Cyber Monday. What I then do is I organize. So I'll have like little columns for each persona and I organize within that within each column, top performers, bottom performers, and spicy ads. That's what I call them. So top performers are just pulled out based on like formally set KPIs, which is really easy. Same with bottom performers. And then anything spicy is stuff that didn't get enough spend, but maybe had like a really enticing ROAS, but we just like launched it at the end of the sale or something. Like I mentioned, I am really crazy about creating net new content, especially over Black Friday weekend. I think it's the way to win. So sometimes, we launch an ad with 1 day left for the sale and it's running at like 20K and like a 4 ROAS, impeccable click-through rate. And it's like, it's not maybe as strong as the other ads in the account because it just didn't have as much time. So I like to like save space for those and put them in a sort of spicy ad section, which I do find really helpful. So that's how I break down like organizing all of the ads that I create post Black Friday. I tend to do a look back just around when the actual promo was live. And then if you are a brand who was running a promo for like all of November, I do all of November because I do a monthly look back anyway. But then I also just do the weekend of because intent is spiked and people are just shopping more, as we all know. So I find it really helpful to look at just that window of time in particular. I typically do Thursday to Tuesday because that's usually when like actual offers are running. And so I look at that specific glimpse in time. That is how I, like I said, go about organizing all the content that I put out into the world. Next comes to the analyzing part. So obviously part of what we were just chatting about is technically analysis. You're analyzing what is good, bad, spicy, what worked with what persona. But this is now a new document that we're talking about. And this is something I usually make as just like a Word document that I can actually post the template to on LinkedIn because I think it's so helpful and important. But this is my Post-Mortem framework. I can't remember because we've done quite a few episodes now. I may have talked about this in the past because I love it so much. It's like the bee's knees to me. But this is my, like I mentioned, Post-Mortem framework. I've used it like across different industries. I've used it in different roles where I'm like managing a ton of people versus just kind of doing my own thing. And I just find that it is objective and also informative, which is very important for a postmortem. I think sometimes like we get really wrapped up in the feeling and we want it to happen and like you're leaving it all on the field and that kind of gets you in your feelings a little bit. But I do think a good postmortem is totally void of all emotion, which is why this works really well. So I'll just walk you through like what I include in the doc. And then, like I mentioned, I'll post it on my LinkedIn as well, as just like a template that you can make a copy of because it's really easy and fun to use. So I start by putting together like an overall summary of what happened. It's really important that you exclude outcomes and you just focus on the like logistics and workflow. I think it's really important to just present what happened instead of, again, like crowding the very beginning of your postmortem with like outcomes. You just want to say like what actually happened? What were people doing? What was the strategy? What was the kind of like schedule for ads launching, ads being approved? All of these things. You really want like a very unbiased account of what really happened. Like I mentioned, sometimes like emotion can really impact how we remember something. How you experience something is really tied to how you feel about it. But this is a way to like break apart how you feel about it and just write down what happened. So it's like how many ads were launched, how many ads were created, what was the budget. Like I said, a very unbiased account of what happened over Black Friday weekend. Next, I write down team-initiated victories. Basically, this means what was in our control that we executed successfully. So you want to discuss things that like were 100% driven by you and your team. You want to like, again, not get emotional about it, but you want to just note down like what were the calls that you made that worked out really well? What were the like facets of your strategy going into Black Friday that worked really well? It's really important to highlight this stuff that again was in your control that ultimately led to your success. Or even if it wasn't a super successful Black Friday, you want to still write down like what actually did work, because there's probably a couple nuggets that you want to make sure you do take into next year instead of just forgetting about it and calling the year a wash. Next, you want to list out your team-initiated opportunities. So what was in your control, the team's control that was executed poorly? I have to say, if you can't do this, you have an ego problem. Like, you didn't do a perfect job. Like, I was chatting at the top of the episode about like busting historic revenue days out the freaking water and doing it more efficiently than ever. But there are still things that I look back on this past weekend and I wish I had done differently and I wish I'd done better. I think that like if you can't name some things that are opportunities after you go through something, you do have an ego problem. And that's on you to fix. That's not going to come from this marketing podcast. That's something else that you need to look into. But yeah, it's really important to be really objective with yourself and think about what could have gone better that, again, was totally in your control. Next thing I list is outside initiated victories. What were the things that were not in your control that set you up for success? Say you run what's like really trendy right now? Let's make up a whole other alternate universe. Say that Twilight is really back in a big way, which to me it always is. Twilight's always at the forefront of my mind. But say Twilight, the first novel, it's popping off, and you happen to sell like Twilight mugs. That's your business. You've been waiting all these years for Twilight mugs to pop off. And this year, finally, because for some reason Twilight is back in the zeitgeist, everyone wants your Twilight mugs. That is not something that you did. Like, technically you made the decision to make Twilight mugs your livelihood, which is interesting and I think really cool. I love Twilight. I can't talk about Twilight, but seriously, if you were on Team Jacob, it's a really busted opinion to have, and you have to think about it a little bit more. I love Edward. But anyway, if the rest of the world just suddenly clocks in and realizes that Twilight is a masterpiece, you didn't do anything to cause that. People just, I guess, saw the light and realized how good Twilight is and got on board. So you want to like note these things down. I think it's really important year after year, on a more serious note than Twilight, to be able to note these things down, because sometimes I've been doing a lot of like those Alyssa Edward tongue pops today. But sometimes, in all seriousness, again, you might kind of have some ebbs and flows, you know? Just like all things in life, business is up and business is down, and same with the economy. And there are lots of different elements that go into what we all do, right? So it's really important to understand when you look back at historical data that you also have this very quick summary of what happened. Because say you are the cool person behind the Twilight Mug Company, and Twilight got really big, and then in like 5 years from now, you're like, well, why wasn't performance like it was in 2025? Guess what, mama? Twilight's not as big anymore. So that is a really bad example, but I hope you know what I mean. It's just important to note down what's happening culturally. It's important to note down what's happening, you know, maybe a competitor, this is a much better, clearer example. Maybe a competitor has like sold out, or maybe, yeah, their top selling SKU that directly challenges yours is just facing some backlash or something like that. Again, that's not something you can necessarily control, but it will have a really big impact on your performance. So it's just important to note it down. Next, I want to talk about outside initiated opportunities. So what was not in our control that set us up for kind of a difficult time? Sometimes I think when I'm like helping people put these together or we're talking about it, this can come into like excuse central, if that makes sense. And again, like I've said it 1,000 times, don't have any emotion when you're filling this out. Also, don't have any emotion ever, period. No, I'm kidding. Don't have any emotion injected in filling this out, and really think about like what happened that kind of nuked performance. I think when brands have a tougher year, this section can get a little out of hand because we're looking to put blame on external forces to kind of make sense in our own minds with what has happened with our expectations and our performance, and that's fine. It's a very human experience, but don't do it in the post-mortem doc. Do it on a walk in your head. Think those thoughts, but don't do it here because it's not helpful for your future progress and Black Fridays. So outside initiated opportunities, they can be things. I think it's really valid, especially this year, to name just sort of macroeconomics, especially if you are a brand who has been heavily impacted by tariffs this year. If you just didn't have the inventory to sell, like that is definitely an outside initiated opportunity, like that's totally fair to put down here. On the other side of the Twilight mug example, if say for some reason, and that would be a dark, dark day in human history for me, we've all decided that Twilight's terrible and we can't talk about it anymore or read it and it's just like wiped from the cultural zeitgeist, then obviously that's going to have a huge impact on your Twilight mug company and you're going to want to maybe find a new line of business to be in. But it should be things like that that are really big and really did make an impact, and really think about, like, is there a strong through line between this thing happening and what happened with my business? Like I mentioned, tariffs are a totally acceptable and very valid thing to list this year. Some years I do think when, like all the time, people are like, the economy, it's an easy thing to talk about and it's an easy thing to list. I think it's important to note, like, things do shift. I've talked about the lipstick effect on this podcast 1,000 times. If you're not selling a high AOV product, you still have good opportunity, especially in a downturn. And also, it's all about sentiment, right? And it's all about proving your value. So I definitely am someone who's not going to blame macroeconomic factors in this outside initiated opportunity section, because I do think that there's a way oftentimes to work through those. It's not to say that they're not happening, but I think if you are good at marketing, they're not going to make or break your overall program, but tariffs and whether or not you have access to your inventory, that kind of thing definitely will. And then at the very bottom, you want to put down a performance summary. So this is the last section in our post-mortem report. What actually happened from a performance point of view? This is different than the overall summary. Like I mentioned, the overall summary, you just want to focus on what were people doing? How many people did you have working in the warehouse? How many people did you have shipping out orders? How many people did you have creating ads? How many creators did you have lined up before that? All these things kind of matter. And then performance summary is what actually happened? If your goal was to hit $1 million and you hit 800,000, where was that extra 200K? If your goal was to hit $1 million and you hit 1.3, where did that extra 300K come from? It's important to really think about the numbers, think about who you were contacting, think about your overall benchmark KPIs and get them down on this piece of paper. I guess proverbial paper, because you're probably doing this in Google Docs or something, but I don't know. I'll love a real piece of paper. I have a physical journal that I really love writing in. But anyway, write down what happened from that performance point of view, so that you can go back and look at it. I also recommend keeping a master spreadsheet with this data because it's a little bit easier to look at. But I think it's good to have this just to reference it when you're looking at everything else that lives in this document. So that is how I go about analyzing. That was a bit long-winded, but I will post the actual example and it's pretty easy to just start plugging in your stuff. Lastly, I want to talk about actioning this stuff out. So this December, big opportunity. Everyone is actually starting to purchase gifts. December is a really fruitful month and people tend to forget that. So you do have the opportunity to immediately start pulling over some of the things that worked really well from Black Friday into your December program. Love. But what you really want to make sure is that you've done this sort of work of organizing what happened and then analyzing it. This is so nuts, but I will schedule myself in my calendar time in July to review all of this lovely documentation that I put together. Okay. So it's fresh right now, right? You're going to do it. It's fresh. You might have noted in your overall analysis that Gen Z men are a really fruitful demographic for you, but you didn't really get to them this Black Friday. And so you're going to start like most likely, maybe not, maybe you are a rebel, but you're probably going to start thinking about that when you're putting 2026 plans together, which is great. We love it, planning for the year. But what's really important is to take these learnings, apply them to the macro business level strategy. And then, like I mentioned, July, August, book some time in your calendar to review all of this documentation so that you can actually put together an action plan to get to where you want to be next Black Friday. Some might say that is insane. I don't think it is. I think it makes good sense. It's good to be organized, and it allows you to like get some space between it. And then when you come back and read this stuff and look over it, I think that it sparks new ideas as well, especially at that point in the year when typically for most e-commerce brands, things are a little bit slower. So it's cool to be able to come back then, fresh eyes, really dig into what you put down and then say, okay, maybe one of our team initiated opportunities was we didn't quite have enough creator generated content to really expand and create a diverse range throughout the entire weekend. So how are we going to, between now and say October, find creators that work for the brand, that fit our personas, and we can start getting content from them, in November, come like mid-November or whatever your timeline is. It's really important, like I mentioned, to come at it with fresh eyes, but also come at it with enough time to actually execute. Do not start planning in like September, October, and looking at this again at that point in time, because it might be too late. Something else you might note is like maybe a team initiated victory is you did a really cool shoot that year with your holiday products, and you might just like need a refresher that that's something that you did, because everyone's busy and everyone forgets. So yeah, book that time with yourself, for yourself, link the documents in it, which makes it even easier. And then you just like see it on your calendar 1 week in the summertime, and it's a fun little reminder and review. That was it. I know it feels and it probably sounds like a lot because I do yap a lot, but it's like not that much. It's like 2 separate pieces of documentation, and then just some thought and analysis, and it'll help you in the long run. It'll help you get those results and feel more secure in what you're doing and be able to like keep building on your strategy and your learnings, which we all love to do. I have to say, I thought this episode was going to be so short, but it's not that short. I always do this. I'm like, I'm just going to go in, I'm going to give some really quick tips. And then guess what? It's 30 minutes, which is kind of the average time. Maybe sometimes it's a little bit longer. But yeah, that was it. I really hope you guys did have a great Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend. It's so much fun. I love it. I'm sad that it's over a little bit, but I'm smiling that it happened. If any of this didn't quite like fit into what you're already doing, or if you have some hesitations, like I mentioned before, if you don't have those personas mapped up, if you don't also understand, I mentioned like a lot in passing what your benchmarks are, just use your usual benchmarks. If you don't know what those are, also give me a call. You can head over to Palette House's website, fill out a lead form. So you came from this podcast and we can chat directly. You can also hit me up on LinkedIn. That's fine too. And we can, chat about that too. Cause I say that in passing a lot, but I do understand that not everyone works with or is running a very mature brand where it's like benchmarks are very obvious and second nature. And I know exactly kind of what the numbers are for growth and scale. So yeah, if any of this was like, ooh, I'm not doing that and I'm scared for next year, this is the perfect time. I know you're tired. You probably don't want to start thinking about it. I am also tired, but I do want to think about it. So yeah, fill out the lead form and we can chat. And I will chat to you guys next week, if not before then. Thanks for listening.